Hi, everybody. My name is Jay Feinstein. I'm a senior podcast producer for WBUR City Space Productions, and welcome to Is Business Broken? And thank you to the Ravi K. Mehrotra Institute at Boston University Questrom School of Business for their support and all their help on this podcast. This is a live podcast recording, and if you like what you hear, you can search for Is Business Broken wherever you get your podcasts. On the feed, you'll hear other episodes asking the thorny questions necessary for this moment about the role that business plays in society. And today, we are presenting a special live episode here at the WBUR Festival, which, as you know, is a love letter to Boston and a celebration of WBUR's 75th anniversary. So before we get started, just a couple of reminders. In case of an emergency, please take a moment now to locate the nearest emergency exits, which may be behind you. Also, we ask that you go ahead and silence your cell phones to minimize disruptions. And we appreciate you being respectful and civil, even if you hear something you disagree with. This ensures that everyone can engage with the rich conversation ahead. You can submit questions for the speakers to address using the information you see on the screens in this room. Go to slido.com and enter the hashtag posted. So I think that's right here, hashtag CitySpace. And in a moment, I will hand the mic over to Marcel Rindesbacher, the head of the Mehrotra Institute, to say a few words. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator, Curt Nickisch. He's the host of the Is Business Broken podcast and a senior editor at the Harvard Business Review. And he will be chatting with Hagiu Ozdaglar, department head for the MIT Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and deputy dean at the MIT Schwarzman College of Computing. Senator Barry Finegold, state senator for Essex and Middlesex counties in Massachusetts. Divya Sridhar, vice president for the Global Privacy Division and Privacy Operations at the Better Business Bureau National Programs. And Andrei Hagiu, associate professor of information systems at Boston University Questrom School of Business. And now, please welcome to the stage, we're going to have Marcel Rindesbacher introduce Curt.
Yeah, thank you so much and welcome to this live recording. The Mehrotra Institute for Business Market Society is an institute at the Questrom School of Business at Boston University. We are a relatively new unit. We were started or founded basically in September 19th, 2024. Our goal is really to do research and education, but also help to have a healthy public discourse about the role of business in society. I think we are in very polarized times, and it's important to really have deep and interesting and constructive conversations about what this role of business is, how should regulation affect business, how should business take care of other things than shareholder value, and all of that. And we have basically partnered with WBUR to do a podcast. This is episode 20 of this podcast. And so if you like what you hear today, please go and check out the other episodes. They touch upon a lot of things that business is relevant for in terms of addressing societal challenges that we are facing today. So with no further ado, I will now basically get the panelists on stage, and Curt Nickisch will lead you through this conversation. So thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to see so many folks here. I just want to put some names to the faces up here. Senator Barry Finegold at the far end, Divya Sridhar, Hagiu Ozdaglar from MIT, and Andrei Hagiu from Questrom. I'm Curt Nickisch, and we have such a rich stomping ground, we really should just get started. We have a lot to talk about. So, AI promises kind of massive gains in, let me just say one more thing. Your questions that you're able to contribute, put them in as soon as you think of them. I'll try to bring them into the conversation, and we'll get to as many as we can in kind of the flow of the conversation as possible. Really looking forward to having your voice in this conversation too. So, AI promises massive gains in productivity, a flourishing of goods and services, but it also poses consequences for jobs, for corporate power, for society. There are going to be winners and losers, and today we're asking, how do we strike the balance between innovation and safety, between competition and concentration, between regulation and robust markets? So let me thank this. Please join me in just welcoming this fantastic panel. And let's just start with a basic question. I'm just curious from each of you briefly, like, why should we even think about regulating AI? Should we? Should we regulate AI? And let's start with the policymaker over there, Senator.
Thank you, and I appreciate everyone coming here today. I think when we think about AI, it's when I talk to my son and I tell him his superpower is his imagination, and I think we have to imagine things differently under AI. But at the same time, we have to think about real-life practical applications. And I think because of that, we do need to regulate AI. And what's a specific example of that? Well, 10, 20 years ago, if there's a big concert coming to town, you see everybody in a long line trying to get tickets when they go on sale. But now what happens if Taylor Swift is coming to town? We had all these bots that be buying up all the tickets. And a lot of us who want to go to that show can't go to that. So what we did last year in the Economic Development Bill is we banned bots. That's artificial intelligence. That is one small example of why we need to regulate artificial intelligence. And I can go on and on about different examples. But if the federal government gets what they want, we're not going to be able to do anything on the state level. Because at the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know. And that's why I think state level people like myself should have the ability to regulate AI.
Although the House of Representatives this week, right, passed a law saying states should not be able to regulate AI for 10 years.
Which we will get into why that's not such a good idea.
Yes, exactly. Sridhar.
Yeah, I think there are two reasons. The first is trust. There was a great KPMG study that came out it covered 48,000 people in 47 countries, and it found that more than half of the population that took the survey, 66%, use AI regularly, but only 46% of people trust an AI system. So there's this massive lack of trust. There's a gap there. And 70% believe that AI should be regulated. So first off, we want to make consumers and users feel comfortable with AI and the fact that what they're using, what they're seeing is what they're getting. The second important point is accountability. And I actually want to push us to think further about whether or not AI truly is living in the Wild Wild West. Is it truly not regulated? I'm going to speak further a little bit later today, talk about some ways where there is this balance between strong laws, regulations that are passed at the federal and the state level, and this zone for self-regulation to exist and co-regulatory programs like those provided by BBB national programs. We set the baseline, we set the practices, and then we go after companies that aren't fulfilling those obligations that they're supposed to be meeting those baselines. So there is this medium, this in-between zone between having hard laws that might pass and then be, not useful tomorrow, and not doing anything at all. And I think that already exists. So I'll share a little bit more about that today.
Great. Thanks, Divya. Asu?
Thank you. AI, of course, is a very...
Hold your microphone nice and close.
No, forgot. AI is a very promising and transformative technology with wide-ranging implications. And I think the regulation should be designed very carefully so that it does not block or impede the development of the technology. But at the same time, I think given its potential harms or misuses, it's important to think about the correct regulatory framework. I think a blanket regulatory framework that sort of applies to everything is not really the way to go, in my view. It really should, for it to be successful, it should focus on where harms can come from. And in that context, I'd like to maybe add a couple of examples to what was discussed before. The first one is around, of course, bias and misinformation. And that by itself may not be enough of a justification for a formal regulation, because no government should be in the business of defining what is misinformation and what is truth. But at the same time, I think AI landscape ecosystem should be regulated in such a way that there are incentives for companies to focus on increasing the reliability of information and not amplify or boost unreliable content. One important aspect in this context is digital ads, which have been used on many online platforms to monetize services. And digital ads really depend on attention, user engagement, their profitability, and attention is triggered by sensational content and sometimes extreme content. So this immediately sort of, I think, biases many of the platforms' operations on this kind of content. So there needs to be something in there. The second is the labor disruption that we'll probably talk about more. And of course, new technologies always come with disruptions, but AI has a great promise in terms of really creating new capabilities or jobs for workers. So focusing on this aspect would be important. And finally, I just want to point out healthcare. Ironically, I think it's the place where AI will have the greatest promise to improve things, where there needs to be more regulation. If you think about, healthcare with doctors and hospitals, they're heavily regulated. You can't really, give advice or diagnosis without proper certification. So there's a big problem there, because when you look at chatbots, they give any kind of advice. That's my mom's favorite use of a chatbot, and that's not okay. So I think this was also the main key point under some of the policy work we did at MIT. I think a key idea would be AI should be regulated where humans performing without AI are already regulated. So that could be a good starting point.
Got it. I love it when we have experts who answer briefly, and that was briefly for the kind of content that we have to talk about today. Andrei, where do you stand?
So I think I'm pretty close to Asu. I think my first instinct is to be very cautious with regulation in order to preserve innovation and progress in AI. The way I would approach this is to ask, what are the market failures that AI creates that justify regulation? So the overarching principle being, if there's no clear identifiable market failure, I don't see why we should intervene. Now, there are some market failures that we can identify that are due to AI. And I think maybe like the question we want to get to later is to what are the specific market failures that AI creates that we haven't seen before? So for instance, I'll just pick an example to make this clear. So there are some concerns that have existed with other technologies. So for instance, Divya, you mentioned trust, right? I mean, so I think if you think about trust generally, so you can say, well, there's all kinds of service providers. We have regulations that ensure that whatever companies don't deceive customers in terms of what they're providing. So they promise something, you shouldn't try to deceive customers. Well, yes, it arises with AI, but we already have legal frameworks for this for other services. So I don't necessarily think there's something specific to AI in that. Now, if you think about Asu's example, which is, well, what about the issue that with AI, people tend to trust more because it comes from a chatbot relative to, say, from a Google search. There you might say, okay, maybe we have a market failure. Maybe we need to revise a little bit the regulatory framework. In terms of market failure, I'll just bring up one or two which I think are interesting. So you think about what are really novel market failures that AI raises. I mean, the ones that came to mind, which I think are interesting, are what happens. So AI is trained on lots of data, and there's the issue about how do we compensate content providers of that data. Is there, for example, AI that can generate generative AI for music? It can be trained on millions of songs. Sometimes it's unclear whether, how much should the copyright providers be compensated. I'm not necessarily saying it should be regulated, but there should be some regulated framework for this.
Gotcha. I'm just curious from the audience here, maybe you can raise your hand really high if you're very concerned about AI and you want it regulated carefully, from the get-go. A little bit. I just want to see how high people raise their hands for concerns. Okay, so we have...
Need a picture.
yeah, it's great. I mean, it's almost evenly split, maybe between people kind of here and in the middle and up high.
The KPMG study was right.
Yeah, really? Is
Of
that
half of all people, I guess.
interesting? All right. Well, that's good. We've got our anecdotal audience here to support the data of the broad survey. I love it. All right. So we've got the central question of how do we regulate AI to protect and serve the public, without freezing progress, without entrenching incumbents. And you raised a bunch of concerns here: surveillance, market power, job disruption, misinformation. We haven't mentioned intellectual property plundering, right? That could be in there too. What keeps you up at night from all those? And Divya, you talk to companies every day. What are they? What are they nervous about? The regulators coming in and stopping, and what do they actually think there should be something done because they see a common problem?
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges has been that AI has bubbled up over the last 3 or 4 years. AI has existed all along, and I think it's just in the last few years where data privacy regulations have also ramped up that AI has become more of a cornerstone, and folks are focusing on it much more heavily. So I think we work with companies directly. I mentioned I would speak to some of the co-regulatory programs we offer at both the global level, the federal level, the state level. We offer safe harbor programs. So we work directly with the Federal Trade Commission to provide policing. So basically, we provide the ability to police and enforce against existing federal frameworks like the FTC Section 5 authority and safe harbor programs for COPPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So I'll give you an example from that space. We recently settled a case with Buddy AI. This is a Gen AI app. And it provides language translation services through an ed tech medium for children under the age of 13. It was found to not be providing clear, meaningful, the ability to give the user and the parent choices and verifiable parental consent, I should say, under COPPA at the federal level. And all of these were flags that we found on our own monitoring efforts. So before it got to the FTC, we were able to find this case, open up the inquiry, work with the company to directly, and they were pretty non-adversarial. Most of our cases are non-adversarial, so we were able to get to the bottom of it, help them, bring them into compliance with the federal guidelines as well as our own guidelines that we've written in conjunction with the government, and close out the case quickly, neatly, and not have to worry about the government's capacity, their resources and time going after this company. So it sets a great precedent to have cases like this, specifically in the AI space, that allows us to work with companies on specific areas and specific sectors. So this one was sensitive data regarding children's issues.
Yeah.
We also work, and it sounds like you want to jump in.
Can I interrupt just to ask?
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of this is sort of existing regulatory frameworks that
Yeah.
FTC could apply.
Sure.
Maybe there's antitrust law we've talked about. So is there a need for new laws, or is there the senator is raising his hand?
I just think it's important, and I just want to
I guess I should say not the senator, but the lawmaker.
Yeah.
Right?
So, but I just want to context. I chair economic development in the state. All I think about all day long is how to keep Massachusetts competitive. The last thing I want to do is have us not competitive in AI. Per capita, we have the most venture capital funding anywhere in the world. So we have a golden goose here. So I don't want to blow it up. However, about a mile from here, 20 years ago, there's a young kid with this great idea called Facebook. And no one understood how powerful it could be. But now Meta will admit that 1 out of 3 girls, because of their algorithms, will say they have body image issues because of what Meta puts on there. We should have stepped in. We should have put guardrails in. So I do believe we can have it both ways. I do believe that we can set up guardrails, what you should and shouldn't be doing, and we can have a thriving economy that, embraces AI. I don't think it's a zero-sum game where it's either one or the other. And what we've been doing here, and let me take one step further, is I think, a point was made of, well, how can you have 50 different AI policies? I completely agree with that. The federal government should be doing it. But will the federal government do it? Absolutely not. 1999, the federal government, in a bipartisan way, passes the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which is a great thing that regulated financial services, and it was a bigger thing with privacy. 26 years later, nothing has happened on privacy and nothing else. So if I felt there could be a bill like that the federal government would do, I'd be like, states should stay out of it. So what we're doing now is I'm working with the state senator in California, in New York, and we're hopeful to have a universal AI bill that everybody can work with. And then hopefully, like we've done in Massachusetts, we are an incubator for the rest of the country and the world. I'm hopeful that someday the federal government will adopt it. But with this context that we want to be pro-business, that we don't want to stifle innovation, and that we can have it both ways.
Andrei, let me ask about market power, because you talked about it a little bit. It sounded like you didn't feel like there was a big threat there, at least at this point. But for a lot of us, we know about OpenAI, we know about Google and Gemini, and we think that, there is, it seems like, to the uninitiated, that you've got a couple of big players there, and it could sort of play out where you only have a Meta. Is there a risk of there just being too much market power for this industry, and we end up with a TikTokification of AI that none of us would like to imagine, maybe?
So this is a topic that I feel fairly strongly about, and my co-author and I made this observation. It's interesting that if you ask industry people like this question, most industry people say if you look at the LLM, so foundation model markets, it's very competitive. You ask regulators or academics, they tend to think it's concentrated. I think on this one, just having looked at it, I'm much closer to the industry people view. So I don't think it's very concentrated. So you mentioned OpenAI and Gemini, but actually if we go down the list, just think about the Gen AI, all the major Gen AI players, there's quite a few. There's and some of them are not large companies. Think about Anthropic. There's Anthropic, Mistral. There's a few open source ones in China. There's all the large tech companies. There's XAI. So I don't think it fits any definition of a very concentrated industry. And furthermore, I don't think it will get so I think there's very good reasons why I don't think it's going to end up like TikTok or Google, meaning one company dominating. I don't think the network effects are there. I mean, it's not like every company from the street, like everybody here can go and create the foundation AI model, but I think there's enough tech companies that can do it that will stay competitive for a while.
Okay, Hagiu?
Maybe I can also respond. I somewhat agree and maybe somewhat disagree with Andrei.
Perfect.
I think right now there are reasons why the current AI ecosystem may lead to concentration of market power and related, in this case, I guess, concentration of social power, because developing foundation models is very data and compute heavy, and there are various first mover advantages. Because when you sort of put a lot of time into developing a foundation model, you have more data, you have access to more data, and we've seen this. Many of the best models. There are a lot of models out there. They vary in their capabilities, and they are used for various different reasons. We know which ones are the best, and right now there's a concern that they are in the hands of a few players. So you asked me this question actually last year, we would disagree, probably on this point even more, except then came DeepSeek, which actually really was a surprise.
This was a Chinese company with less access to some of the computing technology to make these foundation models.
Indeed, less access, I don't know that part, but they used less compute to develop a foundation model with the same performance as the best models that we have in US. So that sort of, but still, as Andrei mentioned, it still requires millions, tens of millions of dollars to be able to develop the foundation model. It still builds on a lot of knowledge that has already been created. So it's not like everybody will be able to do that. But now I think our views are changing, that different players may have different models with different characteristics. I think that's more likely. We don't know. We don't know. I think we don't have an answer right now. It will also depend very highly on open source, what happens with open source. And I think this is a question that is on many lawmakers' mind, I think. So it really is a evolving.
It's still taking shape, sure. Andrei, anything to add to that?
Can I react? So I think this is a very interesting topic. So I think it's useful to use some comparisons. I mean, again, there are some industries, think about industries which are very competitive. So I don't know, take something like furniture. There's like hundreds of providers, right? That's extremely competitive. And then take it the other extreme, an industry which is very concentrated. Say Google search or like a TikTok, right? I mean, like that kind of social, like YouTube, online video sharing, like extremely concentrated. I think AI, so foundation models, it's actually going to be quite far from monopoly. So I don't think it's like furniture because there's capital requirements, but I don't think the network effects and the standard, network effects and scale economies are quite the same as you have for TikTok or Google search. So, and also just precisely because you have open source, I mean, there's going to be a lot more competition. Again, if you talk to industry people, the view is foundation models are basically a commodity.
Yeah, there is a big question on where in the value chain, like a lot of the value is, right? Exactly. Whether it's in the apps, whether it's in the working with companies directly, et cetera, et cetera.
And to this point, actually, I mean, some people know this, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning. There's a lot more competition at the level of foundation models, like the stuff that's very sexy, and there's a lot less competition lower in the stack. So think about chips, which is NVIDIA, and even further down, so I think TSMC, which produces chips. Like TSMC is a monopoly in a way that just nothing Gemini or OpenAI could only dream of. And I think there's very structural reasons that they're not going to dominate as
This is a chip maker that NVIDIA buys from.
That every chip designer buys from, actually.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Everybody in the world buys from.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So, all right, that's helpful. Divya, let's go to you, and I just want to ask about, you kind of brought up an example of algorithmic transparency, maybe with Buddy AI, or can you get into that concern? Because I think that the companies owning the data, that's one thing, but now, like, what's baked into that data? Where did it come from? Who's liable? How do you use it when you're a startup that's just trying to, like, put it out in the market as quickly as possible? What concerns are there kind of at the industry level?
Yeah, sure. I'll share a little bit about 3 cases that the FTC's come out with. These were not cases we directly supported them with, but our role is really to police and enforce against laws and regulations as well as best practices that may come up, and also to mirror what the FTC is doing to identify those unfair deceptive claims that are being made around advertising and privacy. So the 3 that came up were, the first one was with Rite Aid. This was a few years ago, focused on their use of facial recognition technology, and that disproportionately impacted certain communities, certain demographics, and was basically mischaracterizing the shoplifters that were coming into the store. So a really great example of where AI gone wrong with this type of biometrics. In other parts of the world, we see the EU heavily finding ways to regulate the biometric space. I think they have a provision in the EU AI Act that focuses, a statute that focuses on biometrics and why there shouldn't be negative impacts on consumers, especially with regard to this disproportionate harm that could happen with miscategorizing and obvious facial recognition issues. Also, the other 2 cases I'll mention very briefly were there were 2 that I wanted to point out, and I didn't want to misstate the name. So, FTC versus Do Not Pay. This is the world's first robot lawyer. And actually, the legal spaces are super interesting. I want to actually bring up a couple places where that's been found to be a major sector where a lot of issues with AI trying to find sources, being used in court cases incorrectly, misciting, and even making up citations. I think that's a fascinating use case where AI has gone wrong. So the Do Not Pay case, and then that one was busted for deception issues, and then FTC versus Workato, which is AI detection claims. They were claiming they were 98% accurate in identifying AI-generated text when truly they were about 53% accurate. So accuracy claims are a big one that we go after in particular, that we find to be a challenge when companies claim to be something that they're actually not. And we think that consumers should, get the real numbers. They should get the real data and not be deceived into using a service that doesn't work. So those are a few examples. I didn't get into all the nitty-gritty you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think the legal space is one that's super interesting to me, where we've found, I think there was a really good piece in Business Insider that talks about 120 public cases over the last year have had false citations being used. I think some attorney generals have actually incorrectly used AI in different forms. There's just a number of different data points that suggest that the legal profession in particular faces challenges with the accuracy of AI being used in citations and sources. So it sounds like the challenge with AI is you talked about Asu, you talked about AI being used for the high-risk situations, high-risk settings where there's more value. Like healthcare is a great example where there can be predictive capabilities for AI generated models to identify disease in earlier use cases. But there's also the legal sector where, for the most basic citations, where AI is being used and inaccurately citing. So there's this challenge, and this, we're all grappling with where to use AI and where to also regulate, where to add regulation to AI where it doesn't already exist. So those are a couple points.
Great. Sue, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add.
Hold it up close.
This is a topic I think very critical to development of AI, algorithmic transparency. Right now, the AI models are black boxes. So they do not have interpretability and legibility, I would say. I mean, even these terms are not, it's still being debated. And I think this makes it very challenging, because one place I mentioned briefly before where AI has great promise is to complement, augment humans. So this human-AI collaboration, for us to understand why AI is making certain recommendations, certain, where the information is coming from, and be able to get that, combine it with our expertise, and really improve upon what we could do on our own. So that's the great promise of AI. Right now, this lack of transparency or legibility of these models impede that. And the other aspect is, I think, close to what Divya is talking about, for auditing purposes or any kind of proper regulation, this transparency is also very important. So this is a place, I think, where industry, all AI research and development should put greater emphasis. It may need change in the models, architecture, and really thinking about how to use this properly.
I want to follow up on that. I also want to ask the Senator about jobs, but I'll come to you in a second. I'm just curious, as a computer scientist, these problems you're identifying, like how technically hard is that? Is there a sort of a computer science information technology way to address those issues? Or is it like a really big cost and economic and technical challenge to make things more transparent?
That's a very good question. Right now, I think the biggest maybe issue related to use of AI is hallucinations that a lot of people are talking about. AI just comes up with beautiful explanations, perfectly articulated, that are wrong. And because they are, very excessively authoritative in the way they present this information, many of us just take it for granted. And, the examples that Divya gave, I think, are very illustrative of this aspect. In terms of how to fix this technically, I don't think this is the main issue. Hallucinations, I think there are ways, technical ways, that sort of complements what is currently being done through, you may be hearing terms like RAGs, retrieval augmented generation, or, there are tools that can be added to current models that actually improve on the hallucination problem. But that does not still, I think, go into that's also almost like the tip of the iceberg. It's really about this reliable information, focus on reliable information. Giving everyone the incentives to actually focus on that problem is the key. And I think for that, there needs to be a change in vision, mindset, what is prioritized in development of these models and how they're sort of deployed.
Okay. Andrei, you were making eye contact like you wanted to add something. Okay, you do? Yeah, that sounds great. I'll hold that up, yeah.
So very briefly, I think so as regards algorithmic transparency, so I noticed that we shifted from should we regulate to what should the providers do? So, for example, I am not convinced that the fact that, okay, AI hallucinates, for example, the robo-lawyers, there's other more ridiculous examples of hallucinations. I mean, those companies there's going to be pressure from their customers or from the markets to correct those. If we go back to the question, should we regulate for that? I'm not convinced at all. I'm not convinced that, for example, the robo-lawyers should be regulated just because they make mistakes. I mean, the mistakes are so ridiculous that if they don't correct them, people will not come back to them. Mm-hmm. So I could be convinced, I think this could be an interesting conversation. You can say there are certain domains, maybe healthcare, maybe say financial, like mortgages or loans, where regulators may say we do want to, so we require the providers to have algorithmic transparency. But I don't think we should say, okay, just because they hallucinate, we need to require algorithmic transparency from all AI providers. Requiring algorithmic transparency is actually very costly and it's very annoying and may stifle innovation like that we talked about. So I think we would only do that if we really believe there's a serious problem where they're not going to do it on their own. And I think in most domains they will work. I mean, it's in their best interest to work very hard to do it.
You're raising an interesting point because in a case like that with robo-lawyers, like it's clear who's liable, right? Where the mistake was made. And a lot of other cases, it's sort of like unclear where the responsibility is. But I want to bring in the senator because we have talked about jobs disruption as an issue. You represent an area north of Boston that has some corporate headquarters. It also has a lot of people who work at companies in Greater Boston. What patterns are you seeing, and are you just? I guess the question is: are you worried about the pace of change for these emerging patterns in jobs and economic changes?
Well, if you're asking if I'm worried, yes, I'm worried. When the CEO of Anthropic says that 50% of white-collar jobs are going to be eliminated and we can have, 10 to 20% unemployment, I take it serious. I think that guy's super smart. But I also say to myself, okay, 100 plus years ago, half the people in this room would have been farmers, and we've been able to kind of adjust. But what I'm actually concerned about now is I've never, in the last 3 months, I've never got so many calls about, hey, my son or daughter is graduating from college, or my son and daughter needs an internship, that I've never had so many calls. Now, maybe we're in the beginning of a recession, but maybe this AI thing is starting to, rear its ugly head a little bit. Because what does entry-level people do? They do the entry-level stuff, which, ChatGPT or Gemini can do so quickly. So is this the beginning? And, I think it's real. And how we think about this, and I go back to my son again. I say, we have to use our imagination. Like, we have to think about our society different. We went through this with the Industrial Revolution, with the Internet Revolution. 25 years ago, if you were a taxi driver or travel agent, I said to you, your job's in trouble. You're like, what? Basically eliminated. And there's going to be a lot of jobs out there that are going to get eliminated. And I think as policymakers, we have to think, how do we retrain people? How do we have them think differently, and how do we adjust this society? But it's going to be hard. I'm not in the camp that in 6 months or a year, it's going to be over. I think it's gradual, but it's a lot quicker than what we saw with the internet. The internet was 25 years of really changing our workforce. This could be 5 years.
We have some questions that have come in, and I want to bring them into the conversation. One is just. Shouldn't there be distinctions in the regulations for AI that could benefit scientific discovery and the limits designed for sort of average consumer? So AI that supports supports inquiry versus consumer products. Any reactions there? Yeah. Andrei?
My first reaction is, if it's for consumers, I mean, of course, the usual liability frameworks apply. So I think my instinct is, yes, there's probably more scope for regulation if it's consumer or customer facing in general. For scientific discovery, my instinct would be like, yeah, you probably want to leave more room for experimentation, let's call it.
I actually want to challenge that a little bit, because I think the consumer deception, those kinds of claims are already being regulated by the FTC, by self-regulatory bodies. So I think rather than look at those, which are more broad use cases, broad sweep, we look at the high-risk sectors and high-risk use cases, the healthcare sector, right, the financial services sector, where we think there are great benefits and gains, but also could be majorly problematic if they go wrong. That's how the EU is doing it. I'm not saying we follow in the EU's footsteps. The EU is actually scaling back GDPR. They're scaling back the EU AI Act just a year after it was passed. So I don't say that we need to over-regulate. I think Japan just passed a bill in the House this week. It talks about international cooperation. How can that support guardrails and frameworks for loose regulation of AI? I think we look to other countries to see what's been done, what might be going wrong, and then think through it before we jump to conclusions about what that looks like.
Let's stay in the international space just for a minute because maybe we don't get to have 50 different answers in the U.S., but maybe, are we heading towards a world of kind of fractional blocks of AI technology and power around the world? Because China's treating it differently than Europe, than the United States so far. Like, what does that future look like? And are you excited by that regulatory future globally, or not? Or do you even think about it?
I don't know who gets excited about regulatory futures. I mean, I'm excited about AI in general.
Yeah.
Oh yes, fair enough. Other than fair enough.
Right.
Yes,
Keeps
it
me
depends.
employed.
It depends what line of work you're in. That's fair enough.
All right.
I think this is way too broad of a topic, but for instance, I think what's interesting internationally is competition between different countries. I mean, presumably different countries will want their own AI companies to succeed, and you can see one implication of this might be a race to deregulate.
Right. No, I think
So,
that's
I mean, a
that's
good
an
example
argument.
would be, I'll give you an example what I think is a terrible regulation that was discussed in the US at some point. So Senator, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was some discussion, not here, some lawmakers saying we should regulate the number of parameters that AI models are supposed to have. I mean, I think that's absolutely silly. And we can do it, and we shoot ourselves in the foot. And of course, for example, China is not going to do that, and they'll just have more powerful models. I mean, just to put on the table an example of regulation which harms competitiveness, and you can see it's not sustainable on a global level because other countries will say, well, we're not going to limit it, and therefore our companies will perform better.
Yeah.
I also think there's, within the U.S., it's not just about laws and regulations and self-regulation. There's also NIST and other government bodies. They are supporting the national standards. NIST is the National Institute for Standards Development, and so what it does is it provides and maybe you all are working, maybe also you all are working with it. It provides general parameters for what those foundational AI models should be built on, and provides the engineers with the guardrails and with the specs to build on. So I think there's also a role for those certifications, for those standard-setting bodies that can really help augment where maybe we don't have a broad brushstroke AI bill or a law.
May I go back to the scientific discovery question?
Yeah.
It's, I think, important
The
because
computer
that's one of
scientist
the that's one of the most hoped, or one of the biggest promises of AI is sort of supercharging the scientific inquiry process. We saw examples of this. This was big excitement around AlphaFold. The promise of AI in solving really complex problems, and there is now a lot of research in materials discovery, being able to, discover new materials with properties we've never seen before, or drug discovery, or cancer research. So there has not been yet any cures or any really, big advances there, but it may be a matter of time. So there's a lot of progress there or promise there. But I'd like to also point out that just like in other cases, this is not just automating this entire process. We have these new scientist AIs that will discover things on their own. I strongly believe it should be still coupled with human scientists because it's really important to bring in the domain knowledge into the development of these models. Just as an example, there have been many papers that actually talked about new materials being discovered with AI, hundreds of them. But then actually when chemists, chemical engineers went into the lab to actually synthesize those. These were not synthesizable. So it's not just enough to just get a compound. It's really important to figure out how you actually produce that. So I think in terms of, this is not about regulation, but it's still the same mindset. I think AI can automate certain entry-level things, but in many places it will work alongside humans. And how do we actually come up with the right structures and the vision to actually enable that? I think it would be important for us to move forward.
Yeah. So let's bring it back to the senator. We're talking about jobs here and humans interacting with it. The entry-level job disruption is fascinating, right? It used to be the traditional way to get started in a company. You hire these interns in entry-level jobs, and if you don't need them, like what happens to that whole pipeline? It's a little concerning. So one question we have from the audience from someone named Scott. I assume that's their name. At what point will we realize that AI is impacting the job market? Is there like a specific unemployment number you'd want to see? Other indicators, like what? How do we know that it's a problem because jobs are being created and lost all the time?
So I always have my we study data all day long in my office, so we're looking at the numbers, but there are things I look at, like law school applications are way up. Kids can't get jobs, so that's an indicator right now. How many kids are going to graduate school? Like I said, the calls we're getting right now. But it's when you talk to, and I spend a lot of time talking to CEOs and businesses, and you ask them, what are you concerned about? What are you trying to fill? And when they're saying, entry-level jobs are just not on my priority, then who hires these people, and ultimately who trains people? And I think the challenge we had with COVID and everything is like we had young people working remote, and they're not getting the face-to-face. So I think it's just getting harder, and I think we found a way to kind of work without the entry level. So young people are going to have to think out of the box, and we're going to have to help them think out of the box. And I think it's super challenging. If I could just redirect back to, we were talking about, where we think global AI and why we shouldn't have regulation. So I'm a little jaded. I saw Mission Impossible this weekend. So if you happen to see that movie, like, oh boy. But I guess I asked the question, like, why is it so bad if you ever have a kill switch in a model for a major company or something like that? Why is that such a bad thing? Why is it so bad to have whistleblower protection? Because there are super smart people out there. These aren't fringe people. These are some of the smartest people in the world that have said, yes, we think in the next 20 years there could be a catastrophic event due to AI. These are not fringe people. So why not think about ways to try to protect ourselves if something like that happens? And I will continue to say this. We can have both. We can have innovation and we can have protection. It's not a zero-sum game. No. Andrei's he's already ready to go at me, so the mic is yours. The mic is yours.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's interesting that there's talk about superintelligence and general intelligence, AGI, and there is this. Are we right to be focusing on these short-term risks when there's, some people say there's a big existential risk? Is that actually the big regulatory thing we should be worrying about or talking about here?
So I'll take on the existential risk. I'm happy to discuss this over cocktails. I love science fiction. I honestly have not heard a single reasonably articulated, really based in science way in which the existential risk happens. There's a lot of debate there, so I'll stay away from that. That one. Thank you. On the other hand, I do agree with the Senator's point. So I love the terminology guardrails versus. And somehow I think guardrail sounds a lot better to me than regulation. So when you say, for example, kill switch, I'm much more amenable to this than say we'll put a cap on the number of parameters just because we're afraid of some nebulous risk that we read about in Asimov's Foundation or something like or whatever, Skynet taking over. So I think there's I totally agree. There's reasonable ways to to say, listen, we want to have certain frameworks, but you're free to experiment. We can't pretend that we know exactly what is going to happen.
And I think the kill switch is particularly important in the agentic AI space, and you guys have probably been hearing that word. That term is floating around a lot in the last 2 or 3 months, where, you know, instead of the AI being that decision, instead of it being a support tool, it's now becoming the decision maker. So it's actually not just doing the tasks you tell it to do, but it's actually doing it automatically because it's being trained to do that. So this agentic AI space is one where I think it's one to watch, and it's also one that, you know, might need that kill switch option, because AI, you know, to be frank, doesn't have the emotional guardrails that we do. It doesn't know how to regulate, right? So being able to provide it with that and having a human in the loop is important. And so there's been a lot of bills that have debated the human in the loop aspect of AI and whether it should exist on its own or whether there should be a human.
Can I ask a question? Just again, the provocative question is always, why do we think that we as a society need to impose the kill switch and the companies are not going to figure out on their own that they should put a kill swwitch?
I mean,
Like I always come back to this.
How much does it cost, I guess?
No, but if you're a company, like again, there's significant pressures to not be irresponsible. I mean, do we think that?
are you sure? I mean,
I'm talking about the business is broken.
Yeah.
Business is broken. So
Hold your mic up.
So maybe like said like in a very general way, fair enough. But I mean, we agree that there's some disciplining factors on company. So I'm happy to discuss this one in particular. Do we think for example, for agentic AI? So if you're Google or one of the future main providers of agents, don't we think that is in their best interest to provide like kill switches, for example?
Well, it might be, except that's not, what we are seeing now. Right now, at least, there's a lot of focus on AGI, and there's sort of this race to the bottom, kind of mentality, really competitive in terms of bringing these new capabilities, and that's, I think they need to worry about reputational risks, but it's not clear right now that they are moving with that mindset. There's a lot of, I think, rush to be able to get these models out. We've seen examples of this when several companies, moved AI products in education without, satisfactory results. So you would think that responsibility, that social responsibility also should be embedded in the way things are developing. But I think right now the system is one that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of wanting to move fast, and I'm not sure if that's being incorporated.
I'm going to end with just kind of we'll make this lightning roundish, but we'll go through a couple of questions that we have, things that we haven't touched on, but are really good points. And let's just get some targeted answers. Could someone touch a little bit on the environmental repercussions and potential harms of AI? We have not talked about that. Should companies be regulated around use of resources?
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading about that as well. I think there's two things there. There's the enormous carbon footprint, and we know how East Asia, other parts of the world, feel about it versus us, a Western Hemisphere. And then the data centers impact. The fact that we're investing so much, this administration, in data centers, which I don't disagree with, but also is there enough data that shows that those data centers are going to have implications down the road, right? Not just now, but down the road on our carbon footprint. So I think there's this balance that needs to be
what's happening in the
sparked.
In the middle of this feeling of an arms race, right? There's this rush everywhere to push forward. Okay. So we acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think we do. There's a lot of concern around that. There's work around that to reduce the energy needs of the models. It's right now really a lot, and it raises concerns.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing real quick? So, something we think a lot about, and it matches like all of you pay high energy costs. Well, the reason why you do is because we want to change how we get our energy. We export $21 billion a year to other states, other countries for energy. We want to, in theory, grow it here, solar, wind, many others. If we can do that, then I think we'd be a lot more environmentally friendly. So we are working on that as a state, and it's really, really hard to transform an economy from a fossil fuel economy to a green economy. We're trying to do that in Massachusetts, and I think long term that'll be helpful for this issue.
Gotcha. And Andrei?
I mean, I wanted to echo this. Maybe this will be the impetus because of the huge energy requirements. Maybe this will be the impetus to transition to, nuclear or something that's more sustainable than what we have now. Just because we can't basically produce the energy we need for AI with what we have.
Got it. There's another question here about AI regulation around art and IP. It's probably too much to get into. Let's continue this discussion. But let me just close here and ask each of you to just say, if you could implement one AI policy tomorrow, one concrete, impactful, realistic step, what would it be? And could we go down the line? I'm going to start with a lawmaker who's probably thought about this.
Oh, that's a tough question. It's one thing, but I think having some of the reporting models, having some of the kill switch, allowing there to be whistleblower protections would be some of the things that I would just basically like to have.
Yeah.
Which I don't think would disrupt a lot. I think those are guardrails.
So the self-regulator here, what would you like to see?
Companies need independent self-regulatory accountability organizations to support them with ensuring they're meeting the best practices and going above and beyond. So, that way they are putting in the defaults that they're supposed to be putting in to these new tools, to agentic AI and so on. So there is a kill switch at some point, right? So.
Yeah. Hagiu?
Well, it is a very hard question. I think there's many things to do. Maybe, thinking about robust auditing frameworks for safety of these models, and that ties back to the, algorithmic transparency. Having mechanisms for red teaming, at least for certain places, for safety guarantees. Thinking about ex-ante, ex-post, different kinds of audit schemes. So that would be, at least in the first run, helpful.
Yeah, got it. Andrei, tomorrow, do you have one?
I don't, and I'm going to avoid your question by going back to the question about education that the senator mentioned. So I find that topic very interesting. It's like, what do we do about entry-level jobs, and can we identify how much of that is due to AI? I think that's something we want to do. As at Questrom, we have a new AI initiative. I think this would be sounds like a great project for us to figure out how do you get students to learn skills that can get them into new types of entry-level jobs. Presumably the previous entry-level jobs don't work. We need to get them to something different.
Yeah.
I think to me that seems like it's clear there's a market failure there. I don't know what the answer is, but this sounds like exactly what academia could contribute here.
Yeah, and government together, yeah. Well, we've heard about the risks, we've heard about the possibilities, we've gotten a better sense of, what they really are and the paths forward. I think if there is one takeaway today, it's that, we can make choices about all this. It doesn't seem too late. We have time to make them wisely, and we really appreciate all of you for contributing to understanding this problem and identifying ways forward. And let's thank you so much for attending, and please join me in giving this outstanding panel